Cebu Prison, Philippines. Dancing behind bars, imaging getting locked up and then being forced to dance to Michael Jackson's Thriller with hundreds of other inmates. That's what happens in Cebu Prison. The warden turned the prison into a giant dance studio, and their performances went viral on YouTube. It might look funny, but it's actually a strict form of discipline. Inmates who don't participate get punished, and the dance routines are meant to keep them busy and out of trouble. Halden Prison, Norway. Prison or luxury resort. Norway does prisons differently. Halden Prison is basically a rehab center for criminals. Inmates get private rooms with TVs, access to a gym, a music studio, and even cooking classes. The idea is to treat prisoners like normal people so they actually reintegrate into society instead of becoming worse criminals. Surprisingly, it works. Norway has one of the lowest reoffending rates in the world. Evin Prison, Iran. A prison for the unlucky. Evin Prison is infamous for holding political prisoners, journalists, and activists. It's not a place for regular criminals. Instead, it's where the government locks up people it doesn't like. Reports of torture, solitary confinement, and psychological abuse make this one of the most feared prisons in the world. ADX Florence, USA. The Alcatraz of the Rockies. If you think Alcatraz was bad, ADX Florence is even worse. This supermax prison in Colorado is home to terrorists, drug lords, and the most dangerous criminals in America. Inmates spend 23 hours a day in solitary confinement in soundproof cells, with no physical contact with other prisoners. It's basically designed to break people mentally. Some inmates have described it as a clean version of hell. Pedig Island Prison, Russia. The frozen Alcatraz. This prison sits on an isolated island in the middle of a freezing lake. It's so remote that escaping is impossible. There's nowhere to run. And even if you did, you'd freeze to death before reaching civilization. Inmates are locked up in tiny cells 23 hours a day, with only an hour of outdoor time in an even smaller cage. Most prisoners here are serving life sentences, and many go insane from the isolation. The strangest prisons in the world and their bizarre story. Yes, prisons are supposed to be places of punishment and rehabilitation, but some are just plain weird. Some are ridiculously luxurious, others are straight-up nightmares, and a few are so bizarre they don't even feel like real prisons. Here are some of the strangest prisons in the world and the crazy stories behind them. Basti Prison, Norway. The 5-star prison. If you ever end up in prison, Basti in Norway is probably where you'd want to be. This place looks more like a summer camp than a prison. Inmates live in cozy wooden cottages, ride bicycles, fish, farm, and even have access to saunas. There are no walls or fences, but almost nobody tries to escape because honestly, life inside is better than outside for many of them. The prison focuses on rehabilitation, and the reoffending rate is one of the lowest in the world. San Pedro Prison, Bolivia. A prison that runs like a city. This prison is basically its own little town. The guards just watch the entrance, and inside, the prisoners run everything. You want a good cell? You gotta buy it. There are restaurants, shops, barbers, and even a small hotel for visitors. Some inmates live with their families, and kids actually grow up inside the prison. At one point, tourists could even take guided tours inside, which is just insane. Alcatraz, USA. The prison that no one escaped. Maybe Alcatraz was one of the most secure prisons ever. Sitting on an island near San Francisco, surrounded by freezing, shark-infested waters. Officially, no one ever escaped successfully, but in 1962, 3 inmates, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, pulled off one of the most legendary escape attempts ever. They made fake heads out of soap and hair to fool the guards, dug a tunnel, and vanished into the sea. Their bodies were never found. So to this day, nobody knows that they made it or drowned. La Sabaneta Prison, Venezuela. A living hell. This prison is pure chaos. There are barely any guards inside, so the prisoners run the place. Survival depends on money, power, and violence. Weapons, drugs, and even wild parties are common. Back in 1994, a riot broke out, and over 100 inmates were killed in a single night. If you're unlucky enough to end up here, good luck making it out alive. Black Dolphin Prison, Russia. No escape, no hope. This is where Russia sends its worst criminals, serial killers, terrorists, and mass murderers. The security is brutal. Inmates are blindfolded and bent over whenever they're moved. They spend 23 hours a day in their cells, with no human contact, no talking, and no hope of escape. Many go insane from the isolation. The name Black Dolphin comes from a statue outside the prison, but honestly, there's nothing soft or peaceful about this place.
Just as Anstaltli Oben, Austria, the most comfortable prison in the world. This prison looks more like a modern apartment complex. It has floor-to-ceiling windows, private bathrooms, a fully equipped gym, and beautiful architecture. The idea is to give inmates dignity and a better chance of rehabilitation. Some people argue it's too nice and doesn't feel like punishment at all. Kresty Prison, Russia, the most overcrowded prison ever. Kresty used to hold 10,000 inmates in a space meant for 3,000. Cells that were designed for 8 people would sometimes have 20 prisoners stuffed inside. Some inmates had to sleep in shifts because there wasn't enough room for everyone to lie down at the same time. The conditions were so bad that Russia eventually decided to shut it down and move prisoners elsewhere. Rökälljunga Prison, Sweden, the IKEA prison. This prison in Sweden looks like it was designed by IKEA. It's minimalistic, super clean, and everything looks modern and stylish. Inmates have access to video games, outdoor activities, and even woodworking workshops. Like Norway, Sweden focuses on rehabilitation over punishment, which explains why their crime rates are so low. Famous prisoners and their crazy stories. Charles Bronson, UK, one of the most violent prisoners in British history. He's taken guards hostage multiple times and spent decades in solitary confinement. Strangely enough, he became a famous artist, and his paintings have been exhibited in London. Al Capone, USA, one of the most notorious gangsters of all time. He was locked up in Alcatraz for tax evasion, but instead of running the prison, he spent most of his time playing banjo in a prison jazz band. Isadora Duncan fake name, Mystery Woman, a serial killer who escaped from prison and lived a normal life for 30 years. Nobody knew she was a fugitive until she was caught, and by then, she had completely forgotten she was even a criminal. Prisons aren't just places for locking up criminals, some of them have insane stories that sound more like movies than real life. Whether it's the luxurious prisons of Scandinavia or the terrifying hellholes of Russia and Venezuela, these places prove that not all prisons are created equal.